Welcome to part 1 of a multi-part series coming over the next few weeks. In this episode, you'll learn how to build your first web page and what HTML is. We'll get started in a few seconds, but there are a few things I want to squeeze in first. All ages and levels of experience with programming should be able to get the most out of this series. Since this is episode 1, I'll be posting this episode early to get your feedback, so please don't be afraid to comment or get in touch with me with your ideas. They will be mostly screencasts for now, with a couple of slides. Within a few episodes, I hope that you'll be able to start making your own website that's pretty and interactive and everything else you've come to expect from websites. In this episode, you'll learn what HTML is and how it fits in with the World Wide Web, and hopefully well enough that you can go away and build your first pages straight away. They won't be pretty, but they're a huge step onwards. I won't be getting too technical for now. Traditionally, people put pictures of themselves in screencasts, so here's one of me looking at something. The best way to get in touch is through my website or via Twitter. My name is Lawrence Job. We'll brush over a bit of background information before we start. HTML is the language behind the internet. Every web page you've seen is written in HTML. So what is it? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's start by learning what it's not. HTML is not a programming language. A program is a list of instructions for a computer to do. A programming language is the language you use to write that. HTML is more like a description of a page for a web browser, that is the actual program, to read and show to the user. HTML is also pretty ugly and is not interactive on its own. From a basic level, it is a bit like a PDF file. So, why don't we use PDFs? Well, there are 3 main reasons. Almost every computer in the world has software that can understand HTML. HTML came first, by decades. HTML is also a very efficient way of moving information about. With old-fashioned internet speeds, you had to be very careful with how long pages took to load, so you had to make the size of each document as small as possible. Understandably, a lot of people think that HTML looks very scary, with lots of bizarre symbols and often scrunched up into confusing balls of code. It's actually fairly easy once you know what you're looking at. The thing HTML is most famous for is the tag. A tag is always surrounded with the pointy brackets you see here. An example of a tag is title, which you can see near the top of the page. Don't get too bogged down with these words, they're not important, but HTML elements also have attributes and values, which you can see by the HTML tag at the very top. This is saying that the language of the page is English. Lang is language, and EN is short for English. So, back to the theory for one last time. Every tag must open and close. Some can be written so they close themselves, but we'll look at that later. The opening and closing tags are always the same, only the closing tag has a / at the beginning. Everything between the opening and closing of the tag is wrapped by it, and so is affected by it. The most common mistake when learning HTML is to have overlapping tags somewhere in your code. Don't ever do this because it can result in some bizarreness that will take you ages to explain when you try and load the page. Here's a list of common tags. I won't go into this now, but I've put this here as a reference. There are many more tags than this, so I'll also post a few links you should check out once you've got your first page built to make them much more interesting or dynamic. Phew. If you're still with me, let's jump in and get started with the coding. Apple are relatively famous for their easy-to-read HTML. To view the HTML of a web page, simply right-click an empty area and press View Page Source. Here you can see the same kind of source code I showed you before in the example. You can still see the HTML tag, the head tag and the title tag, as well as the language attribute of the HTML element. Another excellent example of good HTML is audible.com. Let's have a look. Again, you can clearly see the resemblance with the page I showed you before. There's still an HTML tag, head tag, and, if we look carefully, title tag. For this reason, almost all web pages are fundamentally the same. So, we're back here. This is what we're going to be making. It's not pretty, but it is a web page, and it's the biggest step you need to make if you want to start making some really nice pages. So let's have a look at the source code just as we did before. Nice and clear. HTML, head, body, title, everything you're used to by now, hopefully. So we can't edit it like this, so we're going to use some form of text editor. The text editor I'll be using for this series is called Sublime Text. You don't have to use it, you can use Notepad if you rather, or whatever the Mac equivalent of that is. But Sublime is free enough for our purposes, and most critically makes it much easier to write in, and it's my favourite. So that's what I'll be using. Okay, so once you open Sublime for the first time, the first thing you'll need to do is save this new empty document it's created for you. So to do that, we simply, as with all other files, press File, Save As. Except the one thing we have to do, which we wouldn't normally, is make the file end in .html. This file type tells the browser that it is an HTML file. So we'll call this one hello world.html. Simply click Save and you've made your first web page. It is a bit dull, I admit. To prove that we have a web page, not that there's much in it, we can simply open up the file in File Explorer, or whatever you like to use if you're on a Mac, and find your file, right click and press Open With, and then choose your browser of choice. I happen to like Google Chrome. So there's our web page. Not a lot there, but it's a start. So let's start putting stuff in it. Let's go back to Sublime. Every HTML file has 3 tags that must be in it under all circumstances. The most important one is HTML. As before, all tags have to open and close. Everything in between them is subject to those tags. The other 2 important tags are head and body, so I'll just go and add them in now. You'll notice that I added a space in front of these tags. You'll find that particularly helpful. It's not required, but it's very useful to see where the tags start and finish if you lay it out very neatly. So the head tag and body tag, you can't see them, so what do? Well, the head tag describes everything you can't see about the page. So a description of the page, or a title of the page, which you can't see, or styling information about the page. All of that stuff will go in the head. Nothing on the page will show until everything in the head has been loaded. The body tag is everything you can see. That is, the big white space in the browser when you load the page. All of that is the body. So let's add our first useful tag. This one is called title, so I'll just write that in. And what's in here is obviously the title of the page. This won't show up in the main body, so where would you see it? Let's switch back to our browser. I'm going to Alt-Tab and see what's happened. Now, there's no sense opening the page and closing it every time I want to see, so you can simply use the refresh button to update once you've saved your changes in Sublime. So let's do that. So, not a lot has changed, but something has. The title in the tab, or if you were viewing it in a different browser, up here, has changed. So you can see how things in the head don't affect the contents of the document here, but they do affect the browser's interpretation of the page all the same. That's all good, but you probably want to actually make something now. I'll just switch back to Sublime. Let's just put some text in the body. Hello world, and save. I'm using Control S, but you can obviously press File and Save. And switch back to the browser. Going to refresh the page, and voila. This is still not a particularly good web page. Not only because there's not much on there, but also because the file doesn't explain what Hello World is. It's just text, so all it can give us is text. What if we wanted to tell it that we wanted another line of text? Let's go back to Sublime. We can't simply use new lines in HTML because they're ignored. So, for example, my name is Lawrence on a separate line will just result in that. That's because we haven't told each bit of text what's a paragraph, what's not a paragraph. So let's do that now. Let's switch back to Sublime and wrap these in P tags. P stands for paragraph. Goodness. From this point onwards, I really recommend you download Sublime or use Notepad or whatever you want to use and follow along, because that's the best way to learn this. And if you do, I promise you'll be writing your own web pages from the end of this video onwards. So, if we save this page and switch back to our browser, once we reload it, it now knows to wrap these in paragraphs. It also knows that these are just groups of text. However, what if we wanted something more than just a paragraph? What if we wanted, say, a title? Let's make Hello World into a title. Let's change the tag to H1. That means heading 1. Save and switch back. Reload the page. Now the browser knows that Hello World is a title. You can actually use H1, H2, H3, H4 all the way to H6 to represent different sizes of headers. For example, you'll want one H1 on a page to describe the title of the page, but you might want several H2s to divide the content into subsections. We'll just stick to one H1 for now. It is, however, important to note that you shouldn't use H1 to represent anything that's large. H1 is specifically for the page heading. My challenge to you is to make a web page about yourself. To do this, I want you to write a heading that has your name in it, a paragraph to describe yourself, and 2 subsections. I want you to list things you can do, just 2 or 3 things you can do, and I want you to list your favourite 3 things. I'm going to do one for myself now. It's the title to being About Lawrence Job, since that's my name. I'll also change the heading of the page to just Lawrence Job. I prepared some text earlier, so you didn't have to watch me waffle on about myself. Let's just copy and paste that in from the left. There we are. Let's have a look at what we've got so far. Let's switch over to the browser. Somehow. And reload the page. There we go. It's a page about me. Let's move on to the next section. Things I can do. Let's move back to Sublime. To designate this section as things I can do, let's make a new header. This time we'll use H2 because it's less important than H1. Things Lawrence can do. And close the tag. I can do those things. But is that really the best way you'd write it if you were to write this in, say, a Word document? Is this the easiest way for someone else to read this list? Because this is, after all, a list. So what if there was a way in HTML to write lists? Well, there are two. There's the unordered list and the ordered list. We'll use both, but for now we'll use the unordered list. That means that our things aren't in any particular order. There are things I can do, but not things I can do more than other things. To do an unordered list in HTML, you simply put in UL for unordered list, close it, and for every item in the list, we want to use LI for list item. Now, let's rewrite the list with that in mind. And close the unordered list. Now, let's have a look at how our two solutions look in the browser. Reload the page. And here are our two methods. Here's just a simple paragraph, and here's a list. I prefer the list for now, because it's much easier to read. And after all, that's why we're making web pages. Let's jump back. We don't need this paragraph anymore. Let's delete it. And let's get started on our next section. We're going to use another H2 because it's just as important as the other section. Lawrence's favourite 3 things. Let's make an ordered list now, this time called OL, not UL. And do exactly the same thing as we did before, except this time things are sorted in order, as you'll see shortly. New list item, driving, because I like driving. Star Trek, because I like Star Trek almost as much as I like driving. Remember, these things are in order. And finally, because I love being put on the spot. Note that Sublime did move the ordered list back into position with OL. This is just something Sublime does, not all text editors will do that, but it does help readability. Let's save our file and switch to the browser and reload the page. You can see that an ordered list is ordered by number, but an unordered list is simply a list of bullet points. So, what if, for example, I like Star Trek so much that I want to allow people to find out more? Since I know that Star Trek's website is startrek.com, I could add a link straight there from here. Let's have a look at how to do that. So, clearly we need to wrap Star Trek with some kind of tag. To do links in HTML, you use the A tag. It's short for anchor. So let's wrap Star Trek in an A tag. So now it knows that Star Trek is an anchor, but that's not enough information for it to do what we want. We need to tell it to go to startrek.com. To do that, we simply use an attribute. This attribute is called href. That's just something you'll have to memorize. And we want it to be equal to startrek.com. To get the address of a web page, you simply go to the web page, say startrek.com, click in the address bar, right click, and press copy. Flick back to your text editor, and just to show you, I'll paste it at the bottom. paste. There are other types of link that we'll come to later, but we don't need them yet. We have the A, and we have the href attribute. Let's test it out. Save the file, switch to the browser, go back to our tab, and reload the page. Now you can see it's changed colour and is underlined. This is something that Google Chrome likes to do with links. Most browsers do something similar. Let's click the link to see if it works. Yes, it does. Now we can add to your biography area a few links for how people should be able to find you on your social networks, if you have them. Let's switch back to Sublime, and I'll simply copy and paste what I wrote earlier, to save you having to watch me do it again. There we go. Again, I've wrapped some text in an A tag, supplied an href, and given them the web address I want them to go to. Let's save again, and jump back, and test it. Let's give it a try. Perfect. There was one more thing on our example page that we haven't done yet, and that is import an image. So, if you have a picture on your computer that you want to share as part of this web page, simply move it into the same folder as the page, like I have done here. My one is called lawrence.jpg, and that's all you need to do to prepare. Now, go back to Sublime, and where you want the image to be, use the img tag. It's just a mnemonic for image. Since we won't be wrapping anything with this tag, we can use self-closing. To do this, we don't need a closing tag anymore. We simply put a / at the end of the tag. So that is the tag name, a space, and a /. But we haven't told it which image to use yet. To do that, we supply a source, or src. And we put in the name of our file. Now let's test that by saving and switching to our browser. There we go. Your first web page is finished. However, what if you want to change the size of the image? Well, with HTML, what you should do with every image is supply a width and a height. To do that, we just add a width equals, let's say, 100, and height equals, because mine is a square, 100. Let's save and test that. Now, the image is 100 by 100. This is measured in pixels. Let's try something more crazy. Let's make the width 1000 and save, jump across. And you can see that the image is now 1000 pixels wide. It's not a good look. Now the basics are out of the way, next time we can get into some much more fun stuff. For example, styling it, changing the colour and the fonts and everything else, and making it more interactive. That's particularly fun. If you want to learn more about the tags you've used today, there are many great websites. The one I recommend for beginners is called w3schools.com. To get to the HTML reference, simply click HTML5 here on the right hand side, and you have a list of every tag you can imagine. So there we are. I promised you that you'd learn how to build a basic web page, and you did. Don't worry too much about the keywords, you'll find yourself accidentally learning them over time, the more you play. And now you're, hopefully, keen to learn more. Well, This series of screencasts will continue over the next month or so to cover styling and interactivity of web pages, CSS and JavaScript to be precise, and how to actually put them up on a web server once I have the feedback I need from this. Then you'll be able to make beautiful web pages all on your own. Then I'll be doing other tutorials on basic electronics and building web applications, starting with logins, object-oriented PHP, and a few more concepts, as well as more basic programming concepts in C and other low-level languages. On top of all that, there'll also be some extra treats along the way. So if this interests you, or if there's anything else you want to know, please tell me so in the comments area. Above all, make sure you subscribe to the channel on YouTube so you don't miss out on any of this. Thank you for listening.